but he was the king, and he was the one that started it all.
No one would care, no one would cry if I should live or die.
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning into this video on Elvis is the Man. So I came across a clip of Elton John being interviewed, and in this interview he talks about seeing Elvis twice, meeting him backstage in '76 and also seeing him back in his glory days, in his prime in Vegas in probably '70 or '71. Listen to this video and audio clip and I'll get back to you with my thoughts.
He was a man that's the first rock and roll record you heard. Turned your musical life on its head.
Yeah.
But that was not really the man you met, was it?
No, I mean, Elvis Presley changed everyone's life. I mean, there would be no Beatles, there would be no Hendrix, there would be no Dylan. I mean, he just was the man that changed music, without question. When they had a Rolling Stone poll, he was the most influential people in rock and roll. I think the Beatles were '1. And I just said, you know what? No, Elvis was '1. Without Elvis, groups would never have picked up guitars. I know he was influenced and drew his influence from gospel and blues and country music and black soul music, whatever. But he was the king, and he was the one that started it all. And so when I first saw him, I was a little boy in a barber shop in Pinner Green, and I looked at an old Life magazine, and there was a picture of him, and I thought it was from Mars or something. And then that weekend, my mum came home with Heartbreak Hotel, and that changed my life. I saw him in Las Vegas when he was fantastic at the Hilton, but the only time I ever met him was very briefly before he went on stage in Washington, D.C., a year before he died, and it was very sad. And but even though it was very sad, even on stage, my mum was with me. My mum said, well, he's not going to be alive much longer, is he? It was typical. But she was sad. She was really sad, because I mean, that was her idol, and my idol. And but even though he went through the motions and was not really there at the scene of the end of that concert, there were still flashes of brilliance, even though he was hugely overweight and just mostly, when he actually sung a couple of lines, it was magical. You don't lose that magic, no matter how fucked up you are. You know, you just, if you're brilliant, snatches of that brilliance will come through.
So one of the first things that stuck out to me when I was watching this interview is that Elton John was an Elvis fan. I mean, I know he saw him in '76, which is what he's talking about here for the majority of this interview, but I didn't know he was like a hardcore Elvis fan. Like, I knew Jimi Hendrix was, Jimi Hendrix saw Elvis live in 1957. We all know that iconic picture he drew of Elvis, which kind of looks like Donald Trump. You guys told me in the comments, and I'm like, yeah, it actually does. I mean, it's well documented about the Beatles, how they loved Elvis, Jimmy Page, so many people, but I didn't know, like, Elton John said his mom got him Heartbreak Hotel, and that just totally changed his life.
And so when I first saw him, I was a little boy in a barber shop in Pinner Green, and I looked at an old Life magazine, and there was a picture of him, and I thought it was from Mars or something. And then that weekend, my mum came home with Heartbreak Hotel, and that changed my life.
Another thing, I don't know if you guys have really heard the story, but Elvis got jealous of that Lisa really wanted an Elton John record for Christmas. And I think this was like Christmas '75, if I'm not mistaken. And he says something to the effect of like, who's this guy? You know, like he obviously knew who he was, I'm sure. But, you know, it was just funny that Elvis was like, pfft. Like one time, Linda Thompson told the story of Elvis watching like a late night TV show back in the mid '70s, and he saw Rod Stewart doing something, and he's like, look what I started. One thing also that I'm happy Elton John noticed, along with me and many of you, is that the Rolling Stone type polls and whatever type of music poll, they always shortcut Elvis. And he said that the Beatles were the most influential. It's not true. It's not true. You know, according to whoever made this tally, but he corrected the record. And, you know, he acknowledges also that Elvis is #1, because I think a lot of these people maybe are like, come out of the like hippie generation, they were influenced by that music, and the Beatles were, you know, the biggest in that era, but Elvis came before all of them and inspired all of them. So I was happy to see it. I was like, that's right.
When they had a Rolling Stone poll, he was the most influential people in rock and roll. I think the Beatles were #1. And I just said, you know what? No, Elvis was #1. Without Elvis, groups would never have picked up guitars.
And also, I didn't know that Elton John saw Elvis back in his prime. So Elton John was born in 1947. And so that means, I don't think he saw Elvis in the 69 Vegas season, the opening season. He would have been like 22. I don't think he saw him early on. But I think he probably saw him. If he said he was phenomenal, it had to be 1970, 71, or 72, really. So Elton John, his first hit was Your Song, and that was in 1970.
And you can tell everybody this is your song.
So I'm guessing it was probably 70 to 72. Tell me in the comments if you agree with me. I mean, it wasn't 75. It wasn't probably even, 73. I'm guessing it was right early on. Also, at the end of this little interview with Elton John, he brings up that Elvis, he was, in a bad way, but he could still see moments of brilliance in Elvis's performance. And that's another reason why I'm just drawn to every single aspect of Elvis's life, because 75, 76, 77, that's when a lot of the drama is going on, and the story of Elvis's life is coming to a head, like the pinnacle. There's so many things and so many theories you can come up with on why it happened, how it happened. But, and that's another reason why I buy FTDs, of the 1975, 76, 77, because a lot of it is the same set list, going back to the same old cities, but it's still Elvis. And you can see flashes of brilliance in those recordings. You can hear them. And that's what I look for. And I'm happy that Elton saw Elvis in his prime. And I'm also happy that Elton could also see his genius even in those later years. His mom was right. He didn't have much longer to live. But I think it's kind of funny how everybody's a prophet, after the fact. Oh, I knew Elvis was going to die. I said he was going to, who knows if that's true. But I'll take Elton's word for it. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button. It helps it grow and expand the channel. Subscribe if you haven't already. Also, a few years ago, I made a video that I'll put at the very end of this video that you can watch, talking about the meeting of Elton, Lisa, and Elvis backstage in 1976, which is what he's referring to here. So I hope you checked out that video as well, and we'll talk to you in the comments.
Subscribe.